as we go live to London for a debate on whether to withdraw an invitation to President Trump for a state visit to the UK.
I will suspend the sitting and clear the public gallery. I call Mr. Paul Flynn.
Thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to serve under your company as a very distinguished parliamentarian, Mr. Walker. I beg to move that petitions 178844 and 171928 are considered by this House. Could I thank the Petitions Committee to allow me to introduce these petitions? There's been a great deal of misunderstanding about their nature. There's one that's signed by nearly 300 people, which says that Donald Trump should be invited to make an official state visit because he's the leader of the free world, and the UK is a country that supports free speech and does not believe that people that oppose our point of view should be gagged. And that petition has gained the 300,000 votes. The one that's gained this remarkable total of 1,850,000 votes in a few days reads this, and it's been much misunderstood. Donald Trump should be allowed to enter the UK in his capacity as head of the United States government, but he should not be invited to make an official state visit because it would cause embarrassment to Her Majesty the Queen. This is a fascinating prospect. One is in the first petition that suggests that some way cancelling the visit, the state visit, would deprive President Trump of his ability to speak freely, when we've had from him in recent days a ceaseless incontinence of free speech. And the man is everywhere, 24 hours of the day, 7 days of the week. But the other petition is saying not that he shouldn't come here. He should come here on business or other matters, but he shouldn't be accorded the rare privilege of a state visit. Only 2 presidents of the United States have been granted a state visit since 1952. It's extraordinary that that's the situation. But here we have a position where 7 days into his presidency, he's invited to have the full panoply of a state visit. Extraordinary, completely unprecedented. And we can dwell on the reasons for that. But the reasons are nothing to do with the fact that we all in this room hold in great respect the United States presidency, their constitution, their history of presidents, which is part of our history, and we know how close that our cultures have melded together in the arts, in entertainment, in our film and cinema. We are merging into almost one nation, but we have a direct interest in the presidency of the United States because he's also the leader of the free world. Give me one honourable friend.
Yeah, the question of the 7-day invitation, would my honourable friend interpret desperation as the reason? And if my honourable friend is able to see desperation for a trade deal, does he think that President Trump might be able to detect it as well?
Yeah. The word comes to mind when we think of the circumstances of our beleaguered Prime Minister, that she's there with this great predicament of being the bridge burner, destroying the bridges to us and Europe, and knowing the possibility, we're told there's Brexit bumps in the road ahead, but it might turn out to be a Brexit sinkhole into which our economy might plunge in free fall. But she had a difficulty. Can the bridge burner be the bridge builder? And of course, she made an attempt to present herself as someone who was going to act as the link between the presidency and Europe, and quite rightly. The president of Lithuania pointed out we don't need a link because we're in constant contact with him through his incessant tweets. But that's, yes, of course, yes.
Giving way. Whilst some of President Trump's views on women, on race and religion are very distasteful indeed, does the honourable gentleman agree with me that the relationship, the special relationship between the United Kingdom and the United States of America goes beyond any individual that might happen to occupy the White House at any particular time.
Agree entirely, and I know in my own life, my father's life was ruined by the First World War, but in the Second World War, I can remember as a child in school seeing the empty desks where children had been killed by the bombs next door. We were very grateful, we remain grateful for the United States at that time. And I think Europe is right to remember that and recall our gratitude. There's no country in the whole of the world that sacrificed the blood of its daughters and sons for the democracies in other countries than the United States. And there's no question of any disrespect towards that country. But there's a great feeling of concern which welled up in this petition. The day after the inauguration, 2 million mostly women marched on the streets of America. 100,000 marched here in this country, and it was an expression of fear and anxiety that we had someone in the White House wielding this enormous power. The power was enormous, but unfortunately, the intellectual capacity of the president is protozoan. We are greatly concerned about the actions that he's taken. I mean, extraordinary actions, blundering into frozen conflicts around the planet in a moment that needed delicate handling, that needed the microsurgery of decisions taken in the past by statesmen. But he went in and he's caused problems every particular area in which he's become involved, in the China Sea, in Ukraine, and in Israel-Palestine.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. Does he agree that to use the expression grab 'em by the pussy describes a sexual assault and therefore suggests that he shouldn't be afforded a visit to our Queen?
Entirely agree. I mean, his manner, his behaviour throughout the election period of one that's greatly worrying. But it was an extraordinary reaction to his own inauguration that was concerning, and I believe partly provoked the demonstrations that took place. He said he was going to object to the election on the grounds of fraud when he thought he was going to lose. But it's extraordinary for someone to complain when they actually win. But he complained about everything. He complained that the rain didn't fall, and we all saw it fall, about the numbers who were in the crowd there were less. He complained and lied about the own result that he had. And this was a great concern when you have a man who's the president behaving like a petulant child. How is he going to behave in a future conflict might arise? I give way to the honourable gentleman.
The honourable gentleman for giving way, and his response to Mr. Trump's perhaps ill-considered phraseology. But what complaint did the honourable gentleman make when Emperor Hirohito came here, who was responsible for the rape of Nanking?
Yes. There have been many people who were here who were less welcome than others. That's absolutely true. But we've had people here who are very unsavoury characters, and not from the United States, as it happens. But certainly we can't try to imitate the errors of the past. We should set an example by making sure that we don't make those mistakes again. My concern is that what we've got here that is a situation that is, as I say, one that's of great concern. Because of the Prime Minister is in an awkward position. I believe that from the 7th day of his presidency, things have got far worse than now in his 31st day of his presidency. We've seen the General Michael Flynn being forced out of office because he didn't tell the truth about relations with Russia. We also know, and he was a victim, he could have been a victim of blackmail. That's a very worrying situation when we know during the election campaign that there were allegations made and there was an appeal made by the presidential candidate Trump to encourage people to hack the accounts of Hillary Clinton. Now, there may well be a case coming up which will show that the position of the President is one that's going to be difficult to sustain if he himself is open to blackmail. We also know of the confrontation that took place between President Obama during the election campaign, warning that this was a likely outcome. Yes, of course.
I'm grateful to him for giving way. A higher percentage of constituents from Brighton signed the petition than from any other constituency, and I'm proud to represent them today. But many of them have raised not only Trump's misogyny and racism, but also his contempt for basic climate science. Would the honourable member agree that to have a state visit for someone who has shown such effrontery to basic climate science is another reason to say that he should not be coming here?
It's extraordinary that Trump, from the cavernous depths of his scientific ignorance, is prepared to challenge the conclusions of 97% of the world experts on this matter. It's a bad science conspiracy theory conclusions that he makes on what is, apart from the nuclear issue, probably the most important issue of our time. But it's on the nuclear issue where he is, again, almost unique in that he believes in nuclear proliferation and he's trying to persuade countries like South Korea and Japan to acquire their own nuclear weapons. We know that the danger of nuclear war is not because of the malice of nations, but the likelihood that it will come by accident, by a human error, by a technical failure, like the one that happened when one of our missiles headed in the wrong direction towards the United States in a recent test. And the more nations that have nuclear weapons, the more likely it is that there will be that problem that will emerge and we can be plunged into a nuclear war. If we look at the question which the petitioners put as a main point is the situation as far as Her Majesty is concerned. And a former permanent secretary of the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, Lord Ricketts, reacted to the invitation by arguing that there was no precedent for a US president to visit in his first year of office. Quite right. And he said it would have been far wiser to see what sort of president he would turn out to be before advising the Queen to invite him. Now the Queen is put in a very difficult position. And I believe for that reason alone that we should consider this, and the government should consider this with a bit of humility to decide what the action should take place and change the invitation to one for a visit, not a state visit. I give way to the honourable gentleman.
Queen's being put in a difficult position. And I know what a great fan of the monarch he is, and indeed, he probably has weekly chats with her. What did she actually say to the honourable member to lead him to believe that she found it difficult?
Not allowed to do that. No. Not allowed to do that.
No, you can't. Dragging the monarch into this debate. All right, colleagues? Mr. Flynn?
I'm well aware of the standing orders on this matter, but I speak as someone with enormous regard for the Queen. She's my inspiration. She's my example. I mean, she's working at an age that's 8 years beyond my age. And I'm certainly not going to be so wimpish as to stand down while she continues with her heroic work at her age. What our main concern, we're in this position now of surrealism, of an Orwellian world that's unfolding before us, where the theme that has been put forward by Trump is that lies are the truth, that good is bad, that war is peace, that fantasy is fact. And we see this with the figure of the Trump big brother, there, ever present, 7 days a week, 24 hours, preaching from this one source of news, the only voice of truth. Give way to the honourable gentleman.
The gentleman for the honourable for giving way. But would you not agree with me that there is something? I mean, even though this ban is clearly completely absurd, there is something quite refreshing about a politician actually doing what they said they do before they were elected. And whilst this ban is quite ridiculous, it is actually a reaction to the chaos caused in the Middle East by previous generations of politicians, which in my view is far worse than anything that that Trump has done, and which many of the people in this room voted for. I mean, where is the will of the American people? Where is your respect for that?
The will of the American people has changed rapidly within the last 7 days. The position now, get the facts. The position today is that Trump's standing is minus 18. That's precisely the level of support that was held by Richard Nixon on the day that he resigned his presidency. He's on a rock bottom. He's the least popular American president in this country, ever. Go through the figures. And he's down on a level of approval that's low, and quite rightly so. But we are doing, and what this meeting here today is doing, is taking notice of what the public says. And we're not going to be in a position where we ignore public opinion or we seem insensitive to democratic decisions. That was the reason that many of us, with heavy hearts, voted for Article 50 last week. We can't allow that gulf to appear in this country, as it happened in America, between the politicians and what's seen as public opinion. And if that happens, that led to the election of Trump. And if we don't ignore what's been said in these petitions and take action from them, they'll greet us with the same cynicism, and they'll see us as distant and look for people to be elected who are non-politicians. That's a great overarching topic on Brexit and on this issue, is that we must maintain the respect for politicians, and we mustn't see an increase in the divisions that are there, the lack of trust that's been happening in this country. In these expenses scandal, our reputation in this House was at rock bottom. Now it's subterranean, and we've got to work to change it. Andrew Rawnsley, a very distinguished journalist, has something to say about the position. He said, some ministers mutter that the big mistake was to issue the invitation to make an early state visit to Britain, a notion conceived as a way of flattering his colossal vanities. At the very least, it would have been prudent to wait before rolling out the royal red carpet, pimping out the Queen for the Donald Trump. This apparently is what they meant by getting our sovereignty back. The words of Andrew Rawnsley that I'm quoting there.
Mr. Walker, I don't think it's in order to refer to pimping out our sovereign, even if quoting some, however distinguished journalist.
I'm sure that's not what the Honourable Gentleman meant. What the Honourable Gentleman did mean when he talked to me a few moments ago was that he'd only speak for 15 minutes. So can we get to the wind-up, please, Mr. Flynn?
Yes, fine. The wind-up is a simple one. It's a great chance to be here and to start off this debate, but I know there are many people who have contributions to make on the subject. But I would say that we're in a position unlike any faced by any previous parliament, where we have a person of a unique personality running the United States. There are great dangers in attempting to give him the best accolade we can offer anyone. Only been offered twice before, of a state visit. This would be terribly wrong, because it would appear that the British Parliament, the British nation, the British sovereign is approving of the acts of Donald J. Trump.
Nigel Evans. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Mr. Walker.
5-minute time limit.
Absolutely. A delight to be under your chairmanship.
Yeah.
I suppose 2016 was a seismic year in many ways, and for those of us in this room who actually believe in democracy, I didn't actually realise that there were so many interpretations of it. And we've seen that just this last week. It's almost as if we had in 2015 the election of a Conservative government, which clearly hit a lot of people hard. Then we had Brexit, and people are coming, to terms with it or not to terms with it in their own way. And then, of course, the election of Donald Trump. And I advise anybody who is interested to go and YouTube a Newsnight video where it shows the leading lights of the United States of America, from Nancy Pelosi, George Clooney, Harry Reid, and various others, all saying that there's not a chance that this man would ever become president of the United States. They sneered when they said it. And why were they sneering? And actually, it's interspersed with the inauguration of Donald John Trump. And right at the end, they say, the United States has a new president. His name is Donald John Trump. So for those people who are finding it difficult to get to terms with Brexit, we're actually leaving the European Union. That's what the people decided. And for those who find it difficult to understand that the American people voted for Donald Trump, get over it, because he's President of the United States. And what I would say for all of us here, and this actually includes myself, is that we have to ask ourselves, why is it that people felt so left behind that they've made the democratic decisions that they've had, which we think we can't understand, some of us. How can you possibly vote for Brexit? How can you possibly vote for Donald Trump? And the fact is that the people have. These were the forgotten people. And just like we had the forgotten people in the United Kingdom, there are the forgotten people in the United States of America. They're the ones that packed that stadium on Saturday to cheer Donald Trump after his first month in the presidency, because actually they like what he says. Now, we may not like some of the things that he says, and I certainly don't like some of the things that he said in the past, but I do respect the fact that he stood on a platform which he is now delivering. He is going to go down in history as being roundly condemned for being the only politician to deliver on his promises. No, I know that's a peculiar thing in the politics that we're used to here, that politicians actually stand up for something and then deliver on them. But the fact is, he is. And I know that we can all go back and talk to the people that we know in our own little echo chambers, and that all we hear are the same things. But the fact is that there were 61 million people who voted for Donald Trump. And when we stand up in this country and then condemn him for being racist, and I've seen no evidence of that, I have seen no evidence of him being racist, or that they attack him in an unseemly way, we're actually attacking the American people, the 61 million people who voted for Donald Trump. If they wanted more of the same, or the usual stuff, well, that was on the ballot paper. But they decided, by the majority of states on the Electoral College, as it works, that they wanted Donald Trump. Of course I'll give away.
I'm very grateful. My honourable friend keeps talking about the 61 million people who voted for, or 62 million, 63 million. Any others? But what they forget is that, of course, Hillary Clinton got nearly 66 million.
Yep, I absolutely agree. She piled the votes up in the liberal California and the liberal New Yorks and the East Coast. She piled them up. But that's not how the system works. And my honourable friend, my right honourable friend, is an expert in American politics. He knows how it works. And the fact is that's part of the checks and balances. He knew, Donald Trump knew how it worked, and it was the people in the middle of America who felt left behind, who felt what they call the deplorables they were referred to. Well, it was the deplorables who were the ones who have felt left behind by administration after administration, irrespective of the colour, and they decided to put Donald Trump in. One thing I would say, because I hope people here too will condemn the trolling of Baron Trump and Melania Trump. We talk about sexism and racism. The racism that Melania Trump has had to put up with since Donald Trump became president is appalling. When she read the Lord's Prayer on Saturday in Florida, the amount of people who had to go at her for doing that, and the fact that she's from Slovenia, that she hasn't got an American accent, quite appalling. So let's hear a bit of parity. And the other thing is, I don't want this House to be brought into disrepute, as my honourable friend from Newport said, in as far as double standards. Double standards. We can refer to all the things about Donald Trump, as some people have, even though he's democratically elected. Xi Jinping was here last year. Where were the demonstrations then? How many votes did Xi Jinping get? How many votes? We had a state visit from a Chinese leader 10 years after Tiananmen Square. And there have been a lot of other state visits into this country over the years. And it's double standards. It's simply because people in this room, and maybe in this country as well, cannot understand why it is that the people voted for Donald Trump, why people voted for Brexit. And until people in this room understand that, then I'm afraid there's going to be more of the same. The people who feel left behind have spoken, and they voted for Donald John Trump.
Right Honourable David Lammy. David Lammy.
I would hope in this important debate, when members of the public have spent a long time thinking about this and actually calling the debate, that some of us might try and be above party politics. This debate cuts to the heart of the nature of our own democracy and how we honour and celebrate other countries. And that's why I think it is important that we reflect on whether it is right, after 7 days, that Donald Trump should be afforded a full state visit. I personally am a great friend of the United States. My father is buried in the United States. I studied in the United States. I worked in the United States. I visited America more times than I visited France. It's a country I love tremendously. All of us, I suspect, in this chamber are well aware of the deep connection and affection that the British people have for America and its people. But we're also aware of the challenges that exist in that country and the contentious manner of the election that led to Donald Trump. That means, I think, that of course, one would expect the leader of the free world to come to Britain, but it's the terms and the basis on which that is done. And for those reasons, I think an official visit might have been appropriate. But to afford this man, after 7 days, a state visit is why so many people have petitioned.
So will the Russian gentleman give way?
I'm not going to give way. It's only 5 minutes. I'm here really because I want to remind the chamber about the path that America has taken and the contribution of African Americans in the United States of America. I want to remind the chamber that there are many African Americans in America sitting at home in fear. They are concerned about a president that has had the support of the Ku Klux Klan. They are concerned about a president that has welcomed white supremacists. It's a term that we almost hope would sort of fall into history, into his close inner circle. They look at events like Black History Month. You think of the way in which our own prime ministers of different political stripes respond to things like that, the sort of statements they make. And you look at what he said, how he made that event all about himself. And you really say in our country, 7 days, and he gets the full panoply of the state, really? I think of my 5-year-old daughter when I think about a man who thinks it's okay to go and grab pussy. I think about a man who thinks it's okay to be so misogynistic towards the woman that he's running against. And frankly, I can't imagine a leader of our own country, of whatever political stripe, behaving in that manner. And it's for that reason that I think people are offended and concerned that Britain should abandon all its principles and afford this man a state visit after 7 days. Really? And why? Because this great country is so desperate for a trade deal that we would throw all of our own history out the window? We didn't do this for Kennedy. We didn't do this for Truman. We didn't do this for Reagan. But for this man, after 7 days, we say, please come, and we will lay on everything, because we are so desperate for your company. I think this country is greater than that. I think my children deserve better than that. I think my daughter deserves better than that. I'm ashamed, frankly, that it's come to this. We should think very carefully about a president whose attitude towards the press is what we are finding out. Abhorrent, frankly. We should think very carefully about a president who has said the things that this president has done, who has put so many people in fear now because of his statement. For that reason, we should not afford him a statement.
Right Honourable Dr. Julian Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Walker. Having been born at the midpoint of the 20th century, I think it's appropriate to look at what happened in Anglo-American relations or in European-American relations, both before and after the 1950s. Before the 1950s, we had two opportunities for a world war, and both times a world war took place. From the 1950s onward, we had one opportunity for another world war, and that world war did not take place. Now, we can all have theories about why there were world wars in 1914 to 18 and 1939 to 1945, and why the Cold War did not become World War III. And I, for what it's worth, will give you my theory. And my theory is this, that whereas in 1914 it was possible for an aggressor to think that it could pick off a small state like Belgium without triggering a conflict from day one with the United States of America, and whereas it was possible for an aggressor in 1939 to think that it could pick off a small state like Poland without triggering world war with the United States from day one, from the signing of the NATO treaty onwards in 1949, it was no longer possible for any aggressor to think that they could launch an attack against any European or non-European member state of NATO without immediately being at war with the world's greatest superpower. Now, for me, that is the single most important consideration. And this debate ought to be about more than the personal qualities of any individual. I would like you to ask yourselves this as a matter of conscience. If you knew that it would make a significant difference to taking a new President of the United States of America who is in some doubt about continuing the alliance which prevented World War III and which is our best guarantee of World War III not breaking out in the 21st century either, if you knew that it would make a significant difference to bringing him on side to continue with the policies that prevented a conflagration on that scale, do you really think that it is more important to berate him, castigate him, and encourage him to retreat into some sort of bunker, rather than to do what the Prime Minister did, perhaps more literally than any of us expected, which is to take him by the hand and try and lead him down the paths of righteousness? Because I have no doubt at all about this matter. What really matters to the future of Europe is that the transatlantic alliance should continue and should prosper. And there is every prospect of that happening, provided that we reach out to this inexperienced individual and try and persuade him, and there is every chance of persuading him, that he should continue with the policy pursued by his predecessors.
I thank the honourable gentleman for giving way and agree with him entirely. and I think it's right and proper that we're debating this issue. But given his views, why does he support the Speaker in actually saying that Trump shouldn't come here? There's a case for that, but it's incongruent with the argument he's making.
Well, I'm very pleased to say that this is a debate about President Trump and whether he should come here, and I believe that it is entirely right that President Trump should come here, and therefore issues about any extraneous matters whatsoever are matters for debate perhaps at another time in another place, but not here or now today. I give way to the right honourable gentleman.
I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman for giving way. But I have to ask him, what basis does he think that giving President Trump a state visit will have the effect that he believes it will have? We've already told him he can have one, and just this weekend we hear him talking about walking away from NATO again.
Well, I'm not at all aware that he has talked about walking away from NATO at all. On the contrary, he has made two criticisms of NATO. One is that he believes that NATO has adapted insufficiently to meet the threat of international terrorism and is too solely focused on state versus state confrontation. And the other criticism he has made is a criticism which, if it is extreme, then it's an extreme view shared by the Defence Select Committee, which is that countries are not spending enough on defence. And he is pointing out, quite rightly, as is his Secretary of Defence, that only 5 out of 28 NATO countries are paying even the 2%, which is not a target, it is a minimum guideline. And the failure of NATO countries to protect themselves is something that has been remarked upon time and time and time again to no effect. And so I finish with this point. It may be strange to relate, but stranger things have happened in history. It may be that the only way to get NATO countries to pay up what they ought to pay in order to get the huge advantage of the American defence contribution, and they are spending 3.5% of their much larger GDP, while so many of our NATO fellow member countries aren't even spending 2% of their much smaller GDPs. If Donald Trump's threat is the only way to get them to pay up, then Donald Trump, ironically, may end up being the saviour of NATO, not its nemesis.
Hammond. Mr. Walker, I'm particularly pleased to be able to attend the debate opened at length by the Honourable Member for Newport West. In fact, hearing the Honourable Member be able to speak at length is justification in itself for this petitions process. I particularly enjoyed his put down of the whippersnappers in the Tory benches who are paying insufficient regard to the experience of the Honourable Member and, of course, Her Majesty the Queen. I thought that was one of the highlights of the debate thus far. Now, I think it's difficult to know whether to be appalled at the morality of this invitation or just astonished at the stupidity of the invitation. As an example of fawning subservience, if I could disagree with my honourable friend for a second, the Prime Minister's holding hands across the ocean visit would be difficult to match. To do it in the name of shared values was stomach-churning. What exactly are the shared values that this House, that this country, would hope to have with President Trump? Now, exemplifying what shared values are is a process fraught with danger, but the Prime Minister, when she was Home Secretary, tried it. She said, there are things like democracy, a belief in the rule of law, a belief in tolerance for other people, equality, and acceptance of other people's faiths and religion. Now, which of these values, as outlined by the Prime Minister, has President Trump exemplified in his first 30 days in office? 30 days, I give way to the Honourable Lady.
I thank the right honourable gentleman for giving way. Would he agree with me that, given President Trump's remarks about torture, his misogynistic stance against women, as well as Muslims, that associating with him in the form of a state visit does huge amounts of damage to the Queen and our monarchy, which is respected and revered around the world, and that the government should have a government-to-government visit and leave Her Majesty out of this?
Well, I do agree with that. I noted also that that Trump's acolytes, according to one newspaper report, had started to choose which members of the royal family they would meet on a state visit. He wasn't going to meet Prince Charles in case the conversation turned to the issue of climate change. I do think this is a world first. Somebody being accorded the privilege of a state visit, actually picking and choosing which members of the royal family that he might be expected to meet. I give way to the honourable member.
When he met Donald Trump and welcomed him in Scotland in 2006, did he express the same views?
Yeah, well, actually, I've met Donald Trump more than once, which will give me an advantage over, I think, every other member in this chamber. I've also negotiated with Donald Trump, which would give me an additional advantage, perhaps to give the honourable member some instruction. Because what you should remember about President Trump, he is not a stupid man. And the belief that he has forgotten what was actually said about him by the Prime Minister when he was a candidate is nonsensical, or indeed her supporting staff, or the Foreign Secretary, when he said he wouldn't go to New York unless he was confused for him. To actually believe that Donald Trump has forgotten these things is to seriously underrate the man's intelligence. If I could paraphrase P.J. Wodehouse, it is not difficult to tell the difference between the array of sunshine and Donald Trump with a grievance. And I can give that exactly from my experience with the American president. And that's what brings me to the act of stupidity which is involved in this invitation. Even when people are in a weak negotiating position, as the UK is at the present moment, thanks to the nonsensical decision to invoke Article 50 without at least having some idea where the negotiations are going to end up. I see Brexiteers shaking their heads. I was actually quoting almost exactly from the Vote Leave website, who said that doing that would be like putting a gun to your head. But unfortunately, that's exactly what the government have chosen to do. To actually put yourself in that weak negotiating position and then to advertise it so blatantly to President Trump, as the Prime Minister managed to do, is a recipe for total and utter disaster. From my experience with negotiating from Donald Trump, let me tell the honourable member, never ever do it from a weak position, because the result will be total disaster. Justin Trudeau, like the Prime Minister, is relatively new in office, yet he has demonstrated how to pursue a business relationship while keeping Canada's integrity intact. The Prime Minister should take note, rescind the state visit before any more embarrassment and division is caused in this country. And since, Mr Walker, since it's already been mentioned in this debate, to actually allow this process to be the pretext for another assault on the Speaker is beyond madness in this place. The gunpowder plot, this new one, will fizzle out just as surely as the last one did. What we should demand from Mr Speaker is fairness to all parts of the House, the ability for all people to be heard, and not a Trappist this.
I don't want to shout or anything. We're not having a debate about the Speaker, and that goes for all members here. You've made your point. Can you return to the substance of the debate, which is Mr Trump's visit?
Well, Mr Walker, I was replying to a point that you allowed to be made in the debate already. And to just state my opinion that this House, across all parties, will not allow this particular Speaker to be removed on this issue, I think is perfectly in order, sir. So therefore, to both in the process of debasing the shared values that we are meant to have with the United States of America, and the point was well made by the member from Newport West that this President in 30 days has managed to achieve a record low in the Gallup ratings. The United States of America is not being invited to a state visit. The state visit is to the individual of President Trump, and to confuse this too is a serious mistake by honourable members and others who support this particular offer. And secondly, Mr Walker, not to recognise from all experience with negotiating with this particular man, to do so from a position of weakness will not result in some face-saving, life-saving, augmented trade deal, but will be a route and a recipe to total disaster for this country. This invitation for the state visit should be rescinded before any further damage is caused.
James Cartledge.
Thank you, Mr Mr Walker, it's a pleasure to serve under your highly tuned chairmanship. I must admit, I don't normally speak on foreign policy matters, but I feel duty-bound to speak because so many of my constituents have signed the petition, and I have to say, first of all, to those who have, I do have sympathy with them, and they are entitled to do that. I'm talking, obviously, the petition against the state visit. As has been said, some of the things said by Donald Trump are extremely offensive. Actually, what concerns me is the points of substance, such as the ambiguity about NATO. That's where we should be worried. But it seems to me that what we are debating here is about UK foreign policy. And to me, foreign policy for this country is best served by following the national interest, not through gestures or knee-jerk reactions, through calm, effective diplomacy in the old-fashioned way, often behind the scenes, and through working towards a long-term strategy, rather than something which, frankly, is redolent of student politics and would be a gesture that would get us nowhere. In my view, we need to focus on the strategic point. There's two parts to that. The first is the recognition that we need to be as close to this administration as possible. If we have concerns, and honourable members clearly have concerns about President Trump, we should be in there trying to shape the administration rather than rescinding an offer that was sent and accepted in good faith. The second point on strategy is to understand who wins if we rescind that offer. We will gain nothing from it if we withdraw that offer. I'll tell you who will win. There's one man who will win, and that's Vladimir Putin. There will be smiles all round in the Kremlin if we follow this petition, because the one thing they want in the Kremlin above all else is to divide the West. They want the UK and the US to be divided. They do not want a strong transatlantic partnership. That's not just in our interest, that is in the global interest, and we would be crackers to do so. Indeed, having said all that, I would offer a state visit to Vladimir Putin, as was done by Tony Blair. That's despite the fact that Russian Bear bombers are buzzing our airspace, that they have nuclear missiles pointed at us, that they pose this huge threat. That's precisely why we do it, because we want to influence the administration. We want to have... I'll give way to my honourable friend.
Influence the administration, he's quite right. Was he not buoyed up that Donald Trump has taken quite the opposite position to Obama, who came here during our referendum and told us that we'd be at the back of a queue for a trade deal, tried to influence our referendum, and yet Donald Trump has said that he wants to see us at the front of a trade deal?
Well, of course, the referendum is done and dusted, and we have some interesting days ahead in the other place about that. I would simply say, I think when President Obama spoke on it, I have to say, as someone who campaigned to Remain, it was a gift to the Leave campaign, to be quite frank. But we're talking about the issue today, which is Donald Trump. And as I said, I would invite Vladimir Putin for a state visit, because for me, they can say offensive things. They can represent terrible values. Russia is not a serious democracy. It has a terrible human rights record. But our foreign policy is about the national interest of the United Kingdom. And that means being as strong as possible, but having as much influence on those countries who are the major players in the globe. And so I simply conclude by saying, Mr Walker, that we should serve this country best by sticking to an invitation we've made, instead of making ourselves look a laughingstock to the countries that matter.
Today, and I want to thank my honourable neighbour and friend, the member for Newport West, for his opening to this debate and these two petitions. I am absolutely delighted, Mr Walker, that my own constituents, nearly 4,000 of them, have signed the petition arguing that Donald Trump should not be given a state visit, part of that 1.8 million across the country. And indeed, that has very much tallied with the concerns that I've had raised with me in person over recent weeks, and that I've also had from those who have contacted me directly about the matter. And it is ultimately for my constituents I speak in this place, and I know where they firmly stand on this issue. But I stand on this issue, Mr Walker, also because I am somebody who loves America. I love Americans. I have travelled to 25 of the 50 United States. My own grandfather was an American GI who came over in 1944 to help us fight the Nazis. We don't know much about him, but he was one of those who came over here. And I've walked, indeed, with honourable members opposite along the beaches of Normandy, along Omaha Beach and other places where the sacrifice of so many Americans was given in the service of the freedoms of Europe and our country. I believe that we should have contact with any American administration, much as I disagreed fundamentally with the policies and actions of President George W. Bush. I was deeply disappointed that that turned for many into a wider strand of anti-Americanism and some way anger towards America as a place and as a people, when actually America at its greatest is a place that espouses the very best of liberty, of equality, of an optimistic government, of one that allows all people to have their freedom, whether that is in the press, whether that is in the courts, whether that is in the exercise of democracy at state or local or indeed federal level. And it is for that reason, Mr. Walker, that I feel deeply concerned and deeply frightened when I see the very principles on which the Constitution was developed by the Founding Fathers being put under question by a president. And indeed he has done so in recent days with attacks on the press, attacks on the judiciary, attacks on the religious freedoms, attacks on those other parts of government that choose to disagree with him. And it's for that that I am most worried and most fearful. And I think we are right to be. I will happily give way.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. Would he not agree with me that this is as much about our Prime Minister as it is about the American President? And this apparent cozying up to people with questionable shared values or records or whatever we call them, not only Trump but Erdogan the day after, also Netanyahu we've seen recently, all this seems to have compromised our ability to be a critical friend.
Well, it is not an easy job to be Prime Minister, and it's not an easy job to deal with governments. The very nature and the difficulties of diplomacy mean that often we have to have contact for other wider national and global interests with people that we might fundamentally disagree with. But herein lies the fundamental point here, Mr. Walker. This is not about whether Donald Trump should be banned from coming to this country or whether or not our government should not have contact with him. Indeed, it's absolutely right that the Prime Minister should meet with the President to discuss matters of mutual interest. But we choose who we honour. We choose the way in which we honour. We choose the way in which we decide to negotiate. I noticed the comments made by the honourable member, the former leader of the SNP. We choose how we choose to engage on those issues. I think Prime Minister Trudeau has shown a very, very different way of dealing with President Trump, where he has been able to maintain his integrity whilst retaining that contact. I will give way in a moment, but if I can just make a little more progress. And for me, that is the fundamental issue here at stake. We have rushed into offering the palace, the mall, the razzmatazz, the champagne, the red carpet. Even if you are the ultimate pragmatist and the matters of equality or standing against torture or standing against racism or standing against sexism didn't matter to you, even as the ultimate pragmatist, that is not a sensible negotiating strategy. No. Giving it all up in week one on a plate without any questions asked. How can that make sense to anybody, even those who argue that we should be having a strong relationship with the United States? I'll happily give way.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way, but one of the most important things here was certainly when President Obama was invited here, he was the first Afro-American president. People shouldn't forget that. And Obama stood for something totally different. Donald Trump doesn't seem to share our values so far. So we should have waited at least 2 years to see how his presidency pans out before we come to these judgments.
Well, indeed, and it's why I have spoken out so strongly on the issue, for example, of using Westminster Hall and the Palace of Westminster, particularly Westminster Hall, given that it is the place where President Mandela addressed us, where President Obama addressed us, where Pope Benedict came, where Churchill lay in state. I think that is a rare and special honour, and I'm absolutely delighted that it is the most signed EDM at the moment in this session of Parliament, and the support that has come from all parts of the House for that. But I wish to make a brief point, Mr. Walker, about the wider issue of state visits. State visits, I think we need to look at again. Many people have rightly pointed out who we have offered state visits to in the past and whether that was right. There were protests when President Xi was here. I have strongly disagreed with much of the way we seem to have formed over some of the monarchies in the Gulf. It doesn't mean we shouldn't have diplomatic relations with them. It shouldn't mean we shouldn't have strong relationships with them. But I have been quite concerned at the way we seem to have turned a blind eye on a whole series of issues. And I think we need to look very, very carefully at the way we choose to use what ultimately is a significant amount of taxpayers' money as well, with which governments, and looking again at the categories and the types of visits that we offer and the way in which those are offered. Indeed, many of us would now question whether or not Aung San Suu Kyi should have addressed us, given some of the concerns we have about the policies of the Burmese government at present. We can have great hindsight, but just because we've got things wrong in the past doesn't mean that we shouldn't get things right in the future. And I think, Mr. Walker, we have a special responsibility when it comes to the special relationship, when it comes to that relationship with our greatest ally and friend. We cannot accept the denigration of a free press, the denigration of a judiciary, the denigration of women, the denigration of religious minorities, the banning of refugees, the advocation of torture as the new normal. We cannot accept those things as the new normal. It wouldn't be acceptable from any country, but it certainly should not be acceptable from our greatest ally, and one of those countries which has frequently stood up in the world for the values of liberty, equality, democracy, and the rights and the equality of all before the law. And that is why we have a special responsibility, Mr. Walker, and it's why we have a special responsibility in this House to speak out. Mr. Walker, I have great faith, ultimately, in the American Constitution, the way it was set up. James Madison in 1788 said, "An elective despotism was not the government we fought for, but one in which the powers of government should be so divided and balanced among the several bodies of magistracy as that no one could transcend their legal limits without being effectively checked and restrained by the others." We too, Mr. Walker, should check and balance our ally, offering up a state visit and offering up all those honours in week one of his already turbulent presidency is not the way to do that.
The Right Honourable Sir Simon Burns.
Thank you, Mr. Walker. And I guess I should start by declaring an interest in that not simply do I have a deep antipathy towards President Trump, but I was prepared to do more than just talk about it. And I spent a considerable amount of time last year working for Hillary Clinton on her presidential election in New Hampshire, Wisconsin and South Carolina, because I believed, as President Obama did throughout the 2016 campaign, when he said that she was the most qualified candidate to run for president in the 20th century. And it deeply grieves me as every day goes by, not least the last 7 days, to see, sadly, what opportunity America passed up for the person that they chose. But we are where we are, because, of course, she did get 2.8 million more votes, but the Americans do not elect their president through who gets the most votes, but through the Electoral College. Those are the rules, so there is no point in crying over spilt milk. I won't rehearse all the reasons why any reasonable person should have significant doubts about Donald Trump, because they are sadly far too well known. But what I do believe is that America is our greatest ally. It has been for a considerable amount of time. It has stood by us shoulder to shoulder in our hour of need, as we did in their hour of need, particularly during 9/11. And so it is, to my mind, foolish to allow our personal views and assessments of an individual and some of their more grotesque characteristics or behaviour to blur what is in Britain's national interest.
Well said, Simon.
And what I believe is Britain's national interest is to continue that special relationship, as we have done under most prime ministers since the Second World War, with probably the exception of Sir Edward Heath, to ensure... Yes, I will.
I'm very grateful to the for giving way, and I know his deep affection for the United States. Indeed, I've been with him at democratic conventions in the past. But is the natural conclusion of his argument that almost the more offensive the American president, the more concerned we are as a nation about who gets elected, the quicker we should rush to give them a state visit? Because isn't the debate really about the nature with which Donald Trump should come to this country?
Simon Burns.
I mean, if the right honourable gentleman will bear with me, I will get on to the timings, because he raises a valid point. But what I was saying was that regardless of what we may think or not think of Donald Trump as a man, I believe it is in our national interest to ensure that we can continue to be a candid friend to the United States, a candid friend who is respected by the United States and has the ability to be able to talk to them candidly, to explain to them when we believe they may be getting it wrong, or where they could be doing it better, or where we can ensure that they can moderate their views to something more in keeping with what we believe is dignified, the correct way to behave. If we just totally ignore the United States, write off the presidency and say, the man is dreadful, so we will have nothing to do with him, we would become isolated, we would become less influential, and it would not be in our national interest. A number of honourable members during the course of this debate and outside this chamber have questioned the timing. Quite frankly, I don't think it really matters when one issues an invitation if one is trying to protect, develop our national interest. Whether it's 7 days into a presidency, you'll be criticised. If you do it in 2020, you'll be criticised for playing around with the American electoral system and trying to help the man in his presumed re-election bid. So, for a last time, yeah.
Well, delaying the invitation for a state visit would at least have the advantage of knowing the President would still be there.
Sir Simon Burns.
The right honourable gentleman may be better at looking into a crystal ball than I. None of us, frankly, can predict what's going to happen next week, let alone next year, the year after, or the year after. The right honourable gentleman might be right. I mean, I would agree with him. I don't think the beginning has been auspicious in any shape or form. And one always, it's a bit like the Bible, one always always admires a sinner who repents. And we will have to see whether the people around President Trump are able to moderate him, to guide him. I'm not convinced that they will be as successful as some others think. But that is not the point. The point is that whenever the invitation was extended for whenever it takes place, there would be criticism for those who wish to criticise. And I think we've got to rise above that. What we have got to do is look at what is going to be most helpful for Britain, for its future policy and development, and I think it is a no-brainer that working closely with the United States is far more important for this country, particularly as we begin the negotiations and the exit from the EU in 2.5 years' time. We cannot afford to be isolated and to ignore our friends and just stand there alone thinking that we are going to ensure that everything works out all right, because more often than not it won't. Loyalty has always been a key mark of this country, whether it be under a Conservative Prime Minister or a Labour Prime Minister. I mean, some people would argue that in the past at times we've been too loyal. I won't intrude on grief with regard to 2001 to about 2006, but that was a difficult time, and maybe we got it wrong in the way in which we talked as a candid friend to the previous but one president. But we all learn from mistakes, and I believe that we have the opportunity, by giving respect to the institution of the presidency of the United States from the start and continuing to work with the United States, that it will pay benefits for this country, for America, and that it is the right thing to do, and that the state visit should go ahead. Though I have to say, and it may come as a surprise to some, I do agree with the Speaker that there shouldn't be an address down in Westminster Hall for a joint session of Parliament.
Naz Shah.
Like a subject we've debated many times since Donald Trump was inaugurated a month ago today. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank every single one of my constituents who has used this petition to have their voice heard. Just over 3,500 constituents of Bradford West have signed the petition to prevent Donald Trump's state visit. That's nearly 60 people in every 1,000 registered voters. In the last 31 days, what we have seen has in many ways been chilling. The executive orders that have dominated Donald Trump's first weeks in the White House have been frightening. And the question many of us are asking, where does this slippery slope really lead? If we take only one of the groups of people he has sought to divide, those of a Muslim faith, not necessarily distinct to one country or another, his rhetoric has been so broad that even I, personally, as a Muslim, feel attacked and misrepresented. And no doubt many of my constituents who make wonderful contributions to this country on a daily basis feel the same way. We have to take every opportunity to show that his negativity and divisive messages are not going to divide us, and just as importantly, we cannot let them define us. British Muslims make an invaluable contribution to the UK as a whole, in all forms and walks of life, from doctors to teachers, from business owners to professionals, and add an immense cultural value to the rich fabric of modern British life. To allow Trump the space to divide a group that plays such a huge role would be a shame upon us all. A report in 2013 by the Muslim Council of Britain tried to put an economic value on the impact of British Muslims make to the UK. The report showed that British Muslims make an estimated £31 billion plus contribution to our economy, and that as a group have over £20.5 billion in spending power. That, just as 2013, just in London alone, of nearly 13,500 Muslim-owned businesses create over 70,000 jobs. This shows a glimpse of the real impact Muslims have in this country. This is how Muslims should be portrayed, not the fearful, racist, bigoted views of someone who has used fear to win votes. Last year, I have to give way.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. Does she agree with me that it is deeply saddening and shameful that colleagues who are defending this visit are not recognising the serious concern people have, particularly Muslims, but many other communities, about the dangers of the rhetoric of Donald Trump? And it's time they spoke out against that kind of hostility. It's deeply divisive, and it's time they address this issue instead of making excuses and being apologists for his hatred.
I thank my honourable friend for making them very valid points and absolutely concur. Last year, when we first debated a potential ban,
I'll happily take up my honourable friend's challenge. His attitude to Muslims is an outrage. And what's most outrageous is it's totally lacking in evidence, because all of the deaths caused by terrorists on US soil since 9/11 have been caused by US citizens or residents. And the 9/11 attacks were caused by people from outside the US, but from none of those 7 countries. So not only is it prejudiced, it totally lacks any evidence.
Thank you very much. I thank the honourable friend for making those very valid points. I continue. Last year, when we first debated a potential ban, Mr. Walker, in this very chamber, I went on public record and I said that I wanted Trump to come. I wanted him to visit Bradford West. I wanted to take him out for a curry. I invited him for a curry. I wanted him to see what contribution Muslims make to this country and to my constituency. I wanted him to meet real Muslims, not the ones he has invented for his own ends. I wanted him to walk down the street and meet people such as the Chief Superintendent, Mabs Hussain, who was born in my constituency. I wanted to take him to the school like Iqra Primary and meet a Muslim head teacher. And I wanted him to visit health professionals like Sahara and Lister Pharmacy and see Muslims on the front line of our healthcare service. I wanted him to see some of the tremendous businesses in my constituency being run by Muslims, providing jobs and growth, like Lala's, like Khan's, My Lahore's and many others. I wanted to show the world the cultural impact Muslims play in my constituency through things like the amazing Bradford Literature Festival that is run by 2 extraordinary Muslim women, the annual World Curry Festival organised by a Muslim man. But to do so now, Mr. Walker, now that he is president, will only reinforce and condone his actions, his divisive, racist and sexist messages. That is sadly what he stands for at this moment and what he represents. And this flies in the face of everything we stand for, everything we thought we shared. We cannot support what he's doing by offering him legitimacy. My honourable friend touched upon double standards. The difference in this conversation here is that the British people are aware of the human rights violations by them, about the misogyny that happens when we offered a visit by the Chinese Premier. Such as pointing out all of that. We do not look to China for its record or advice and support on human rights records or on how to treat women. We do not do that. But we do look to America. We do look to the United States of America, the leader of the free world, to support us in those shared values. What this president does not represent is those shared values that belong to us, that belong to this house, that we have seen. You know, my children have even seen the movies where women have thrown themselves on these cobbles outside to get the right to vote in this country. We have seen what has happened with the civil rights movement. We cannot, where does this, when I spoke about this in the main chamber, I talked about the 3 steps, the first 3 steps to genocide as defined on Holocaust Memorial Day in their booklet. And I can tell you we're already on step 3. So when the Honourable Gentleman tells me, are we stopping World War III? Actually, what are we contributing to by allowing President Trump to continue in that rhetoric which divides people and tells us that the Muslims are the enemy, that the Muslims are the enemy within? That is me as a Muslim in this house. I am not an enemy to Western democracy. I'm part of Western democracy. I fought my election really hard. I fought against all them things, that bigotry, the sexism, the patriarchy, to earn my place in this house. By allowing Donald Trump a state visit and bringing out the crockery, the china, the red carpet, what we are doing is endorsing all those views, all those things that I fought hard against, and saying, do you know what? It's okay. So I absolutely thank the millions who have signed this petition. My heartfelt thanks to them, and I really, really do hope we do not honour this president.
Crispin Blunt.
Debate so energetically opened by the Honourable Gentleman for Newport West. He referred to our beleaguered Prime Minister, and I'm looking forward to the kind of authority she's going to exert when she's not quite so beleaguered. And I'm still puzzling over the meaning of his protozoan power, but I will come back to the power exercised by the President. But first of all, we should take a reality check. This invitation has been issued in the name of Her Majesty, and if we want to find a way of embarrassing her, withdrawing that invitation would be the quickest way about it. So we are left in a situation where formally the word of Her Majesty, but also that of the United Kingdom, is now engaged. And now let's get on to the Realpolitik behind this. It is very likely that opening up the possibility of an invitation for a state visit secured our Prime Minister the first call on the newly elected President of the United States. And during the course of that visit, she got the incredibly important assurance around NATO, so expertly referred to by the Chairman of the Defence Select Committee.
Very grateful to the Honourable Gentleman for giving way. I heard him being interviewed on Radio Scotland this morning, and he said on Radio Scotland what he's just said just now, that it was very likely that Theresa May had used the offer of a state visit to secure the first visit to Trump. Can he confirm what his source for that statement is?
No,
Crispin Blunt.
I'm simply using my own assessment of my own experience of my career as to how these matters are arranged, and therefore what might have happened. I'm happy to confirm I have no first-hand evidence of the discussions. So it's merely using my experience as to what might have happened. However, she secured that first visit, and she secured the undertaking about NATO with immense importance to the security of Europe. She got a reaffirmation of the special relationship by being the first foreign leader to visit him. And also the day before, you will notice she had a spectacularly successful visit to address the Republican caucus in Philadelphia. And here we need to understand what is going on. We are dealing with a president who is the first non-politician and the first non-serviceman to be elected to the office. He is definitively different. And in an exercise of pressing the right buttons to engage him, I think dangling a state visit in front of a half-Scottish President of the United States, whose mother had an immense attachment to the country, was a very successful use of the kind of soft power that the United Kingdom has. But as well as securing the undertaking around NATO, let's understand the checks and balances that this president will have to operate under. First of all, he is going to need to operate under the checks and balances that come from the Congress, and the Republican caucus in the Congress is going to be immensely important in that. And for our Prime Minister to have secured a place where she has an opportunity then to be, in effect, putting our case, which might also be aligned with the case of the State Department, the Pentagon, and the CIA into the White House, if the right honourable gentleman is brief, because this is out of injury time.
The honourable gentleman continues to seriously underrate President Trump. The idea that this president is going to have things determined by anything other than his own interest and what he perceives the American interest to be is a mistake of such naivety that explains the fact that he managed to get into the White House in the first place.
Crispin Blunt.
Well, I would draw the right honourable attentions to the fact of what is actually happening as this president who is come from an area where he's not being disciplined in the requirements of our profession or the service profession, who is then issuing these undisciplined statements. What has he had to say about torture? That he will concede his judgment to that of his defence secretary. I was cheerfully told by LGBT friends of mine that he was about to rescind the employment protection for LGBT people in the United States. He didn't, as it happened. We've then seen what's happened in the row between his national security advisor and his vice president. Who won out? His vice president. And then if one looks at the immigration terms of the immigration ban, that is being overturned by another element of the separation of powers in the United States by the judges. So we are seeing the development of this administration with this, of course, this extraordinary, unprecedented election of this individual to the presidency. I won't. The honourable will forgive me because I think I'm now out of injury time. But the point I'm making is this is early days, we are beginning to see the necessity for a disciplined administration begin to crowd in on this president, and we will see how this develops. But it is incredibly important that our Prime Minister has secured the first voice into the White House of a foreign leader. Now, the truth is we need to calm this debate, and we need to take the hype out of it. And I don't just mean the debate in this chamber, but frankly the national debate. The invitation has been issued. I don't think it should or could be properly rescinded. And so there is the possibility that the invitation will be taken up in the course of this year. I think that would be a mistake. I think we need to point out that in 2020, we are going to have the 400th anniversary of one of the most remarkable events in British American history, which is the Pilgrim Fathers. Incredibly important in the United States, and it would be an utterly appropriate moment to be marked by a state visit to the United Kingdom by whoever is the head of the American state at the time. And so I think we should focus the administration's attention on that opportunity. A head of government visit this year would be entirely appropriate, because if we don't take the hype and out of this debate with all the people who signed this petition, there is every possibility that, of course, this visit is then going to become a rallying point for everybody who is unhappy with the direction both of American policy or British policy or anything else, and we will then be left with the poor old commissioner of the Met is going to be left with a rather significant public order issue to manage. And so I think there is an opportunity to look forward, to celebrate a great anniversary in British-American relations and extract ourselves from the practical difficulty of this invitation having been issued. But if you're asking me, if it was the issuing of that invitation that secured a reaffirmation of the special relationship, a commitment by the President of the United States to NATO, reinforced by senior members of his administration in Europe this weekend, and an opportunity for us to reinforce the voices into the White House from the State Department, from the Republican caucus, from the Pentagon and the CIA, that was infinitely the right thing to do.
A number of colleagues who've already spoken are intervening. I know this is a debate, but if they desist from intervening, we might get everyone in from their own parties as well. Kirsten Oswald.
Mr Walker, it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and I am pleased to be able to speak today on behalf of the thousands of my constituents who signed the petition objecting to Donald Trump being invited to the UK for a state visit, as well as the large number who contacted me saying they didn't wish to sign that particular petition, but they strongly objected to a state visit taking place. And many of those who contacted me said they'd never signed a petition before, but they felt so strongly that this was wrong that they had done so now. And no wonder they were concerned. What on earth have we come to that the UK government should for 1 second think that it was appropriate to reward the disgraceful statements and actions of President Trump with a state visit? A state visit with all the pomp and ceremony and fantushery of the British establishment. It is hugely depressing to hear those on the Conservative benches who support the state visit yet again today telling us that it's important we engage with President Trump because America is our friend. And so it is. But that's why we should challenge this. President Trump's administration so far has been characterised by ignorance and prejudice, seeking to ban Muslims and deny refuge to people fleeing from war and persecution, because that is what he said and that is what he has done, and it is simply racism. But the Prime Minister has decided that she'll take any friend she can get for her hard Tory Brexit, and to hang with the refugees, to hang with the Muslims, to hang with anyone who's different, to hang with our EU nationals, to hang with women, Mexicans, to hang with people fleeing war and terror, because that is what this plan for a state visit says. And let's not kid ourselves. This UK government, with its ever-reducing plans to help child refugees, has knowingly and deliberately couried into this Islamophobic, misogynistic, dangerously confused, if events in Sweden are anything to go by, leader of the free world. Instead, as one of my constituents said to me, of having the balls to stand up and show some kind of moral backbone. President Trump's words and actions are horribly destructive for Muslims across the world. They absolutely will foster Islamophobia and racism. And we have all heard about the nasty, insidious, creeping racism that has felt able to raise its ugly head. Hate crime incidents up 41% in England and Wales since the Brexit vote. And this state visit ramps that up further, giving all those who feel the need to persecute other people the comfort they need, especially as they may now feel that it's rubber-stamped by this rudderless shambles of a UK government. On these benches, we have grave concerns about the effect this has on people living, working and studying in Scotland. And many Muslims are understandably upset and fearful. And other groups too are upset and fearful. As the mother of mixed-race children, I am upset and fearful for the future in a way that I have never been before. Because this is a time of flux and uncertainty, and there are dark clouds gathering in many parts of the world. Our job here should be to shine a light, to stand tall. We should be taking the moral high ground and sending a firm message to President Trump that this will never be acceptable and he needs to stop. But instead, this UK government has rolled over to have its belly tickled. And shame on all of you involved if you don't rescind this invitation for a state visit now. This will never be in our name.
Edward Lee.
There are two ways you can approach this debate if you agree this state visit should go ahead. You can argue along the lines of national self-interest, which is the relatively easy way, and there's a more difficult way that you've got to seek to understand what Mr. Trump means to many people in America. So I'll start with the first. It seems obvious to me that great countries like our own act in their own national self-interest, and they issue these invitations in order to further that self-interest. Presumably, when we invited not one, but two presidents of China, we were prepared to overlook the fact that this is effectively, in China, a police state. There's no freedom of expression, of movement, of association. There's outright religious persecution. In every single respect, it is a state which doesn't share our values in any shape or form.
Presumably when we issued the invitation all those years ago to President Ceausescu and awarded him a knighthood, we felt it was in our interest so to do, our national self-interests. Indeed, we only rescinded the award of the knighthood on the day before he was executed by his own people. Presumably, well, of course, I'll give way to my honourable friend.
I think the honourable member is making a valid point, which is that there's not a great deal of consistency about the way in which we offer these state visits, or for that matter, the content of them. I think it was particularly useful when we offered one to the President of Colombia, because I think that helped progress the peace process in Colombia. But I just wonder whether he wouldn't support the idea of the Foreign Affairs Committee and the Procedure Committee doing a proper review of state visits so that we get this right for the future.
That's a perfectly valid point, and I have no objection to that point of view. And just to continue the historical analogies, presumably when we invited President Mugabe, a racist homophobe, to have tea with the Queen, we were prepared to overlook his transgressions as well. And when we invited King Abdullah of Saudi Arabia, who presides over the ultimate misogynist state, we presumably felt that Saudi Arabia was an important ally of our own. So we just got to be careful what we wish for in this debate. Just think for a moment. If we did listen to this petition, which people have signed in perfectly good faith, I accept that. It's a perfectly reasonable point of view. But if we were to accept it, if we were to, as a result of this debate, rescind this invitation, it would be catastrophic to our relationship with what is our closest ally. And I won't labour that point. But my honourable friend for New Forest has surely won this argument in that sense, that our whole peace and security, the whole peace and security of the Western world does depend on us using influence with President Trump. And I, for one, believe that the visit of the Prime Minister, our Prime Minister, was an absolute triumph. An absolute triumph, not only in furthering our national self-interest, but by binding President Trump and his new administration into NATO. And we are seeing the effects of that only this week in terms of what the Vice President has been saying. So I think that there's no doubt in my mind that it is in our national self-interest to accord respect and honour to our closest and our greatest ally. And whether we like it or not, this man is the duly elected, democratically elected leader of the free world. To me, that is the easy argument to make. But I feel that I've got to follow my honourable friend from Lancashire in making what is probably a much more difficult and controversial argument. We had a debate a year ago on Mr. Trump, and speaker after speaker condemned him, said he was outrageous. Even people from my own side. I think I was the only one who tried to understand this phenomenon and why people are supporting him and voting for him. And I made the point then, and I make it now, that I think it's very unwise of us to try and transfer our own views, our own prejudices, our own viewpoint to the other side of the Atlantic. I mean, most people here, for instance, think that I am on the far right of this political spectrum in this House. But here I am, a person who warmly supports gun control, who opposed the Iraq War, who relies entirely on the NHS. All these things would make me just an abomination in large parts of the Republican Party. So it's very foolish for us to lecture our Conservative colleagues on the other side of the Atlantic about what is the right or the improper nature of conservatism. Mr. Trump is not my sort of conservative. I really have nothing in common with him. But I will say that let's look at some of his comments. The charge of misogyny. I mean, of course, what he said, what he was reported to say in a private conversation is absolutely horrible and ridiculous, and I hope none of us would make it. But which one of us has not made some ridiculous sexual comment sometime in our past? Well, in private, let he who is without sin cast the first stone, all right? He's apologised. That's not really a reason to withdraw and implement. Well, I better give way because somebody is casting an intervention.
I thank the Chair for letting me give way. I cast no aspersions, but is he seriously suggesting that it is a legitimate perspective and point of view that the comments made in public by Trump on a number of issues, including marriage equality for LGBT people, and in private, which were recorded and then broadcast on sexual abuse and attacking women, are legitimate
position, and he stands there and thinks it's acceptable to say in this chamber and say in this House that that kind of position is acceptable.
I said actually precisely the opposite. As far as I know, I've never spoken like that. No friends of mine have ever spoken like that. I completely deplore it and find it ridiculous to speak like that in private. All I'm saying is that most of us would actually be rather embarrassed if everything we'd ever said in private, in our past, was ever... I've given away twice. I think I better get on now. I knew this would be a difficult argument. It's easy to dodge it, but I think it's only fair that you have to make it. As regards this argument of racism, the fact is that I don't believe there's any proof that actually this travel ban is racist. Indonesia is the largest Muslim country in the world. There is no question of a travel ban on Indonesia. All these countries are riven by civil war. This travel ban builds on work done by President Obama. So to accuse the new President of the United States of racism, misogyny, and all the rest, I think is overstated. I knew these arguments would be difficult to make, but the fact is that there are 61 million American people who actually voted for Mr. Trump and support him, whether you like it or not, whether he fills you with complete rage. The fact is, he is there. He is the duly elected President of the United States. Our interests rely absolutely on trying to influence this man, to bring him over here, to tie him to our point of view. He would never get elected in this country. His views would have no traction in this country. He would never become the leader of the Conservative Party in this country. None of us would campaign along the lines that he has campaigned on. All of us disagree fundamentally with so many things that he has said. But he is there. He is elected. We have to work with him, and that is why it would be a disaster if this invitation was rescinded.
Debate expected to continue possibly for several more hours here. You can watch this portion, though, anytime online in our video library. Just type House of Commons, Trump visit into the search bar. While you're there, you can also find previous debate about President Trump in the House of Commons from earlier this month. And we'll be back live for question time in the British House of Commons Wednesday morning as Prime Minister Theresa May takes questions from members of Parliament. That'll be live at 7 a.m. Eastern on